The year is 1993, and Richard Garfield has a game that he's producing. Some of you might know it. It's Magic: The Gathering, and he is yet to produce it at scale, but that's all going to change because in 1993, he's going to go to Gen Con with no one else other than Peter Atkinson, which we'll read a little forward in this lovely magazine, which you see here. Ooh, the top-down camera. Peter Atkinson is the CEO of Wizards of the Coast, and he is about to change Richard Garfield's life forever by making this game a tremendous smash hit. And then later in that year, this magazine was produced. We're talking, it's the difference between August and then into the final quarter of the year, somewhere between October and December of 1993. This magazine was made. So we're going to go through this magazine today, this wonderful piece of Magic: The Gathering history. We're going to read through the entire magazine. And if you want to follow or subscribe to my channel, because a lot of this, it took a lot of work to set up this magazine. I'm always going to be very forward with the prices that I have on things. This was about $150. And it was only possible because of my Patreon and also the AdSense payments that I get on YouTube. I'm sort of allotting myself, money from the channel in order to make these things happen. And if you think this is cool and you want to see more stuff like this, it's because I am using the money from the business accounts in order to purchase these things. So thank you to everybody who has watched. And of course, thank you very much to my patrons. I'll put their names up on screen now. But without further ado, let's get into Duelist Magazine Edition 1. So right off the rip here, it's actually very interesting. So this actually says winter of 1994. However, this magazine, I believe, went into production in 93, the last quarter. So the release of this is just slightly after that. And as you can see here, it says Anson 93. So this artwork was done in 93, and this was also produced for the Arabian Nights set, as we see here. And it says by the art of Anson Maddox. And I'm not sure if Anson Maddox does other artwork for MTG. I'm sure that they have. If they have, I'm actually going to put some up on screen now. We'll see if we can find some other artwork by Anson Maddox. There's also an interview with Richard Garfield, which this right here is actually one of the big reasons why I wanted to really get into this and sort of do a deeper dive, because I'm very interested to see, as I think all of us are, what were Richard Garfield's initial words in 1993 about this game, 1994. And then, of course, we have a look at the new expansion set, which is Arabian Nights. And then also a very interesting sort of foray maybe into Commander, where they talk about 5-player Magic and other ways that you can play MTG with more people. So all this is very exciting. So let's just get into the very first page here. So we'll move this over. Whoop. How's that look? This is great. Have you seen these men? If so, contact our local AFTOP office immediately. The Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Paint Thinner, and Deviant. Does that say pornography? That says pornography. Interesting. Okay. I'll be honest. So I haven't really read through a lot of this. And what I'm talking about is right there. I have no idea what this is in relation to. If anyone knows, I would love if you could post it in the comments down below. I know some history from around this time period, but I only got into the game the last couple of years. Is this... yeah, so this looks like just an advertisement or sponsor page, but I wonder why this is in here. Maybe somebody just thought it would be funny to incorporate this. And now this is an official Wizards of the Coast product, and that is in here, which is hilarious. This over here is about Arabian Nights. So this is sort of like a little teaser. It's about Shahrazad. So I read through this. I'm not the biggest fan of the content that's in here. It's about like murdering all of his wives and then marrying a new wife like every single time or every single evening. He like has a new concubine or wife. That way nobody can betray him. I don't know. It wouldn't have necessarily sold me, but we're talking about the 90s here. Very different time. If you're interested, I'll pause here just for a second so you can pause the video and read this. I can maybe even zoom in if you'd like, but it's a little bit hard on my eyes to read this anyway. So let's move on to the next page. So that was page, what is this, 2? And then here is the contents. So interestingly, there is this whole little section over on this side, as you can see here. that is sort of the inaugural address. That's what they're calling it for this magazine. And I think it would be very interesting for us to just read through this. So let's do so. On Friday afternoon in August 1991, I had the privilege of meeting Richard Garfield. When he described to me his idea for a collectible trading card game, I was filled with an awe I hadn't felt since I was introduced to Dungeons & Dragons in 1978. There you go. By the way, this is Peter Adkinson, president of Wizards of the Coast. Here was a truly new concept for the fantasy industry, a game of limitless potential. Since then, Wizards of the Coast has devoted a tremendous amount of time and energy to developing what he means is money, to developing and marketing Magic the Gathering. We feel strongly that Magic defines a whole new gaming genre, and we're eager to see it explored. We plan on designing several more card games that use the Deckmaster paradigm, and we understand that the success of Magic has encouraged other companies to develop similar products. And by the way, I think it was in 1992, it was Adkinson and Garfield actually had to sue another company, I want to say, because they were infringing on the Deckmaster paradigm. That's what they're calling it here. But it was like a series of rules that they were developing, and they actually had to sue somebody else for like infringing on the rules, which I find interesting. To support the growth of this new genre, Wizards of the Coast has established The Duelist, the official Deckmaster magazine. Within these pages, you'll find information not only on our own trading card games, but also on related products that our peers in the gaming industry introduce. We will preview upcoming releases and introduce the artists and designers who have contributed so much to the field. Readers will have the chance to ask those burning rules questions, discuss problem cards and quote killer unquote decks, and post notices on gaming and collecting to other members of the Duelist Convocation, which is the Deckmaster Gaming Organization. I wonder if that still exists. That's kind of interesting. On the lighter side, you'll find short fiction, a comic strip based in the world of Dominia, and, naturally, gossip. We hope the magazine will prove to be a valuable reference for players and collectors of trading card games, both ours and others in the industry. I'd like to thank you all for making the dreams of a small game publisher come true. We at WotC got into gaming publishing because we love games. And it was our dream that someday we would be able to give something back to the industry that has played such an important role in our lives. We hope that with Magic the Gathering, we're on the right track. Somebody clip that and send it to whoever is president and CEO of Wizards of the Coast right now. Remind them of this last paragraph. We at Wizards of the Coast got into game publishing because, quote, we love games, end quote. And it was our dream that someday we would be able to give something back to the industry that has played such an important role into our lives. Crazy. It feels like definitely a change in sort of the culture over the years, but that could also just be because it's a massive company with tons of other subsects underneath it. I'm not going to get into the negatives here. So we have contents here. I mean, so much to get through. We have a history of Arabian Nights, The Expanding Universe, a conversation with Richard Garfield. That's the one I'm most excited about. That's 2 full pages of interview questions. They have 5-player Magic and also how to play a multiplayer version of Magic. I am so curious to see how close is this 5-player Magic to what we know in Commander today. There's also this whole history of how Commander was made. There's a lot of conflicting evidence to suggest who actually did what first. And I'm not going to get into that in this video, but I think that is interesting. And then we have some other interviews. That's actually with Anson, which is the artist that we looked at on the front. And we have a bunch of new things in here to get into. This says Murmurs from Dominia. So let's see here. I just want to make sure it actually shows up well. We're going to read through this. So, Magic the Gathering. Why should a simple collectible trading card game make such a large impact on the gaming industry? The answer lies, I think, in Magic's ability to fire the imaginations of such a variety of people. A basic principle of marketing is that to sell a product to a certain group of people, you have to cater to what they like. Unfortunately, for most marketers, people's taste differs so much that when you appeal to one market, you often turn off another. The most popular products break this rule by attracting people of widely divergent tastes and backgrounds. You know, I think that they actually nailed that on the head. Like when I go to my LGS and I play, there is such a wide variety of people that I'm playing with. I never feel like I'm playing with like the same old like white men, except for the ones that are in my own like home group. But when I go out, I mean, it's always a different group of people of all backgrounds, and you can get together and have a good time regardless of your affiliation. And I love that about this game. Up next, thankfully, Magic the Gathering falls in this category. Aha, there it is. After talking to fans of the game from all over the country, I've concluded that people's reasons for liking Magic are as different as their tastes in movies. Some are collectors, excited by the art and the polished look of the cards. Others are competitors, bent on devising potent card combinations, building power decks. And some are simply explorers, intrigued by Dominion's ever-expanding universe. So Dominion must be like the initial sort of world that Richard Garfield was playing in, or maybe it was Peter Atkinson and Richard Garfield made it up. I'm not really sure. Could just be the Deckmaster series. For me, and by the way, this is Lisa Stevens, the vice president of WotC. For me, the fun of playing Magic the Gathering isn't in the winning, though I hate to lose. Haha, this sounds like my fiance. Maybe my fiance wrote this. Instead, the fun is learning to adapt to the cards that have been dealt to me. I play with a deck that has over 200 cards and all 5 colors of Magic. How wild. I enjoy the fact that no 2 games I have ever played with this deck have gone exactly the same way. Finding a strategy that suits the cards and the occasion is much more interesting than playing with a small, predictable deck that will whip the socks off an opponent. Of course, many players disagree with me, preferring a deck built of 1 or 2 colors and some killer card combinations, but pitting different deck building strategies against each other is part of what makes Magic so entertaining. So if you ever see me at a convention, I'd love to play with you with my monstrous rainbow deck. Oh, everybody call your Kenrith 5-color decks monstrous rainbow decks. It may not be much of a power deck, but it holds its own against all comers, and perhaps more importantly, holds my interest in this fascinating game over and over again. How fascinating is that little segment there? So that was Lisa Stevens, the vice president of WotC. So we have the president and the vice president statements here in the content section. That is like so freaking cool to me. It's the first time I've read these. I absolutely love getting a glimpse into what their thought process was. So like, I mean, obviously I feel like Peter's message was more about like the sort of like ephemera of the game and getting to love a system, and then also thanking probably his stockholders or something like that. And then Lisa over here is just about, you know, playing the game how you want to play it. And I feel like the diversity sort of statement has probably held up the best, honestly, out of the 2 statements. I still feel like there's such a diverse community. Let's move on to the next page here. So this, my friends and family, is a history of the Arabian Nights. So we're going to read through this. I hope that you enjoy my reader voice. I'll see if I can zoom in a little bit to get some good frames for you. Let's just make sure that's good and focused so people can see it perfectly. All right, so history of Arabian Nights. Flying carpets, jinns, Aladdin's lamp. Thanks to the Arabian Nights, these bits of Eastern folklore sound as familiar to the Western ears as fairies, leprechauns, and Jack's beanstalk. It looks like an L, sorry. Like Western stories, the Arabian Nights tales bring alive a timeless world of wondrous magic and fantastic beings, where a wandering merchant may be a long-lost relative, and a good tale, well told, can save a life. Like King Shahryar. I'm gonna say Shahryar. Like King Shahryar, who cannot kill his own bride until he hears the end of her story, readers cannot stop in the middle of one of Shahrazad's lovely little tales. Readers can find something to suit every taste somewhere in the tales, which range from moral fables and etiquette lessons to romances, farces, and even racy comedies. Racy comedies, oh baby. The form of the tales is as intriguing as their content. Instead of ending one tale before beginning the next, Shahrazad inserts another story to illustrate a point or explain a metaphor, then another to provide background on one of the characters, and perhaps yet another just to make a joke. When she does manage to work through all the layers and finish a tale, she immediately starts in on another one, telling Shahryar and the reader that this new story is even more strange and fantastic than all the ones before it. The variety of the tales included in the Arabian Nights reflects the differing imaginations of the many, quote, authors, end quote, who first created them. Originally, the tales came from many different cultures, growing out of the rich storytelling traditions of India, Persia, Arabia, Egypt, Babylonia, Israel, Greece, North Africa, and possibly even China. Those damn Chinese, I'll tell you what, brother. They were first recorded as a distinct group sometime in or before the 9th century CE, according to a text fragment that mentions the Alf Layla wa Layla, literally the 1,000th nights and a night. Though this title suggests that there were 1,001 stories, there were actually far fewer, perhaps little more than 200. The 1,000 in the title intended only to indicate a large number, and the extra night was added to alleviate the possible bad luck associated with even numbers. Though they received a little attention from Arabic scholars, published versions of the tales continued to flourish, especially in Cairo in the 13th to 16th centuries. So we're like halfway through this, which is honestly very interesting to me. And it's just, it seems like it's not so much about the card game, but it's actually about like this sort of fantasized Arabian Nights storytelling. I'm curious to see how it fits into MTG. The Arabian Nights made its Western debut in 1704 through 1717 when J. Antoine Galland first translated it into French. Galland, primarily interested in the literary value of the tales, based his text on a variety of sources and chose to include a few tales that had not previously been considered part of the Arabian Nights. Many other translations of this era were based on Galland's, including 1 or 2 Arabic versions that were later held up as, quote, original, end quote, Arabic text. E.W. Lane first introduced parts of the Arabian Nights to English-speaking audiences in 1839 through 1841, but his version was incomplete. A full English version wasn't available until John Payne's 1882 through 1884 edition. Payne's translation, written in the Gothic style popular at the time, appealed strongly to the Romantics' longing for exotic fantasy, popularizing the Arabian Nights and becoming the standard English version of the tales. The rather florid 1885 through 1888 translation by explorer Sir Richard Burton eventually became more widely distributed than Payne's, but Burton relied so heavily on Payne's version that many scholars considered his footnotes on Arabic customs his only real contribution to his own book. Many modern translations of the tales still owe some of their phrasing to Payne, one exception to his 1990 translation by Hussein Hadaway, who based his version on a 14th century Arabic manuscript. Though many readers are less interested in magic and fantasy than those of Payne and Burton's day, the main attraction of the Arabian Nights is the same as it had always been: the chance to visit the fabled Golden Age of Baghdad, when Harun al-Rashid was commander of the faithful, and even the most unlearned villager could spin tales of wonder. Their inherent magical flavor and exotic feel provide the perfect setting for the first Magic: The Gathering expansion set. Beverly Marshall Sailing. Wow. Okay, I need a break from reading for a sec. You don't see magazines like this anymore. Let me just say, just like fancy border, which I don't know. I guess it fits. It's fine. And then just text, just a wall, a sea of text. I feel like you don't see this very much anymore. And if you go back and you look at like old gaming books, a lot of them after like the mid 90s do have like these little snippets and cutouts. But obviously we're pre that. This is 1993, baby. That's when this was produced, and then, you know, maybe put out in 1994. Crazy though. So basically they're just going over the history of Arabian Nights, and then down here, that's how it links into MTG. They love the magic. They want you to go back to Baghdad, like the Bazaar of Baghdad, one of the most legendary cards from the set. That's what they want you to do. That's so interesting to me. I also find it interesting. This is almost like the original Universes Beyond stuff. And I know that Universes Beyond, I'm using it a little bit loosely when I say that. Of course, we're thinking more of Transformers or, you know, Fortnite or League of Legends, whatever, being Universes Beyond, quote unquote. But really, I mean, this is not too much of a stretch from that. It's like we're talking about a historical period of time for a specific city, Baghdad, right? And then we are sort of romanticizing this and turning it into our own thing, which I think is kind of interesting. If you go back and you look at, there's an old card game called Legend of the Five Rings. They're actually, I think, still producing for it, but Matthew Colville did a wonderful video called The Greatest Story in Gaming, or The Greatest History of Gaming, something to that effect. I will see if I can link it, or you can easily look it up on YouTube. And the way he put it was, it's a white guy's version of what's cool about fantasy Japan and fantasy China. And I think that this fits the bill so perfectly. This is around the same time as that, within a few years. And this is what a white guy's cool idea of fantasy Baghdad was. I think it's very interesting that this was sort of like the culture around that time. We're going to take these cool old places and we're going to sort of give it our own little spin. So that's pretty neat. So let's keep moving. All right. Oh, all right. Well, there's Charizard right there. Right there. That's the card where you put everything underneath the table, and then you just completely play a new game. I love that in one of the episodes from what are they called? Oh no, Card Market Magic. It's Card Market Magic. I refuse to look it up. It was Card Market Magic. They did a Commander episode where somebody had to actually, or they played Charizard, and then they had to actually go under the table and play a totally new, different game. I find that so interesting. But we're just talking about the philosophy and the story. But right here, this is actually Richard Garfield's writing. So let's read what Richard Garfield had to say about this specific sort of expansion set. So let's get into that. So the philosophy of expansion sets. Magic the Gathering Arabian Nights is the first of Magic's expansion sets. I think they kind of messed up the syntax here. Arabian Nights is the first of Magic expansion sets. Additional cards for use with Magic the Gathering decks. These expansion cards are meant to add new color to your game. A regular infusion of new cards will constantly change the dynamics of the duel, preserving the challenge of trading and deck building. Oh, there's no trading here, only spending copious amounts of money. Ideally, the pool of cards upon which players can draw will be so large that there will always be unknown and surprising elements. Expansion sets are also an opportunity to develop the character of Dominia. The multiverse is immense. Expansion sets allow game designers and players to explore new parts of it and discover aspects of the, quote, old world which new cards can uncover. To preserve the collecting value of the cards, each expansion will be a limited release. To distinguish expansion sets from the cards of the original limited release of Magic the Gathering, each expansion will have its own identifying mark. As we all know, right? In the case of Arabian Nights, this is a scimitar that appears just below the right-hand corner of the art. Some of the expansion cards may then be incorporated into later editions of Magic the Gathering decks so that the environment in the game is always being refreshed. No new card will be added to the Gathering series without first appearing in an expansion. In this way, players and collectors are not forced to purchase a whole set of Magic the Gathering cards to obtain a few new additions. Well, guess what? You're damn right. I don't have to purchase a brand new set, but I will be paying $80 for a One Ring. So there you go. The story behind Arabian Nights. One of the biggest inspirations for Magic the Gathering Arabian Nights was The Sandman, number 50, Ramadan by Neil Gaiman and P. Craig Russell. There is even one card that is directly inspired by the story. Interesting. From the outset of Magic, I was interested in the possibility of thematic additions to the game, releases in which the designers and artists share common ground. Reading Ramadan sparked my enthusiasm for Magic expansion set and the captivating world of the Arabian Nights. I had always been a fan of the Arabian Nights stories, but this book reminded what an intriguing, dynamic environment the tales offer. The literature is rich with people, monsters, magical devices, and places. Correspondingly, the expansion cards have many creatures, artifacts, and lands. There are deserts, which provide colorless mana or attack or damage attacking creatures. There are also a host of rare lands, each which has a special power. Bazaar of Baghdad, hello. Other exciting elements of the expansion include the Genie and Efreet cards. Each one has a fairly powerful creature that can be as troublesome to you as it is damaging to your opponents. Even while in your service, the Genie and Efreet are struggling to get out of... The Genie and Efreet are struggling to get out of it in their own special way. That is so funny. There is actually an Efreet card. I think it's called like Tempest Efreet or something like that, but it requires you to play for bounty or play for whatever their version of bounty was in this game. And it's illegal, rightfully, in Commander to be played because it introduces that into the game, which is very interesting that that was being produced at this time. But this is the first expansion set, so I don't really know what more you would expect. It's also incredibly interesting to see Neil Gaiman crop up in here. I'm also a fan of Neil Gaiman. I've read some of his books. They're great. And I've read a little bit by P. Craig Russell, but I'm not terribly familiar. And there's probably going to be some people lighting me up because I've definitely seen the name. I know it's definitely like a household authorial name in the 1990s era, but I was a late 1990s baby, so I probably didn't read too much of it. All right, I had a little break there, but we're back. So moving up next is the features to watch out for in the expanding universe Arabian Nights. And Richard Garfield says, while there are no additional rules for Arabian Nights, there are some new and potential confusing new card features. Special lands. There are a number of lands which do things other than provide mana. If these lands do not explicitly say that they produce mana, then they don't. If these lands are changed to a basic land type, as with Phantasmal Terrain, they produce the appropriate mana, but lose their special abilities. Controlling cards. When control of a card in play changes from one player to another, the card, if tapped, remains tapped until the new owner can untap it. If the card is a creature, it cannot be tapped to attack or use a special ability until it starts a turn on the new controller's side. Problem cards. Finally, there are a couple of cards which require a bit of clarification. The first is Rook Egg. While the text on the card says that Rook Egg is generated if the Rook Egg goes to the graveyard, the Rook Egg may not simply be discarded from your hand into the graveyard and then brought into play as a 4/4 flying creature. The card should read, if the Rook Egg is destroyed, and players are encouraged to interpret the card this way. Aladdin's Lamp is also a bit confusing. The casting cost reads 5+5. While it appears to be a mistake, it isn't. The casting cost really is 10 mana of any color. 10 simply wouldn't fit in the circle indicating casting costs. Yo, that's crazy. So I didn't know this, that the original Aladdin's Lamp had 5 and 5 because they couldn't fit it into the little circle. Those are like the little design things that I feel like you would just totally miss out on unless you read something like this. And the Rook Egg, I actually did know about that because it's sort of like an original sort of like misprint, if you want to call it that. And I know that there's a few folks that I've watched that have pointed out that that is an actual error on the original Arabian Nights card, but this is all very interesting. So this is, I think, the end of it. As you can see here, let me see if I can move this over a bit. There you go. So for production, the creators of Arabian Nights, obviously Richard Garfield is the designer. The logos were made by Christopher Rush, which we know Christopher Rush. He's done tons of artwork for MTG. Editing is Beverly Marshall Sailing. Art direction, graphic design is Jesper Miriers. Okay. Typesetting, Dave Howell. Production assistant, Sandra Everingham. And then lots of jobs too numerous to mention. Jesper, My4 Dave Howell, Victor K. Courts. I do want to just take a minute just to look at the play testers. It's interesting. Apologies to those that were lost in the shuffle. There's got to be more than this for sure. I bet that probably it also made more sense to print it in like this type of format here, just ensuring the fact that you're able to get it all within this page once it's finally printed. Oh, artists, Dan Frazier, done a ton of art. Chris Rush, obviously, tons of art. This is the gentleman who is doing the artwork for the actual, the cover page for this, interestingly. Who else do I know on here? I'm not too familiar with any other names, but I know Dan Frazier, quite legendary, Chris Rush, and Anson Maddox. So they've been with it since the very beginning based on this. Let's keep going. So this is really like the meat and potatoes of why we're doing the video today. It's to go over this interview. I'm very intrigued about this. And we actually have one of our first photos right here. This is by Lily Wu. And we're going to talk about Lily Wu. I have some interesting stories to discuss about that. But let's read through this. So an interview with Richard Garfield in the Halloween of 1993. Peter Atkinson and Richard Garfield sitting down at a table in 1993 to record this. In 1985, Richard Garfield graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a degree in computer mathematics. And after 2 years with Bell Labs, Richard returned to the alma mater to obtain a PhD in combinatorial mathematics. Sure. Since 1992, Richard has taught at Whitman College in Walla Walla, Washington. And then in June, he plans to leave teaching for a while to concentrate on game design with Wizards of the Coast. How crazy is that? So the first question, what is a professor of mathematics doing designing adventure games? They classified this as an adventure game. That's actually really interesting to me. Richard's response is, well, I've been designing games for, let's see, I'm 30, for 15 years. I love that they put in like the little dashes. I'll see if I can get a better picture of this on screen. So it's been a long time hobby of mine. I never really expected to make a career out of it. I stuck to more traditional careers, more reliable income. It was more my interest in games which brought me to mathematics than the reverse, probably. What? The sort of thought you use in my field, combinatorics, is often the sort of thought you use in playing games, solving puzzles, and the like. Now, I'm not really sure what combinatorics is. I'm not going to lie. I feel like I'm a relatively educated person, and this is maybe an outdated phrase. I don't really know, or maybe I'm just not in that world enough. But this is very, very interesting. And I totally agree. More reliable income. I feel like this type of thing is of such a risk. And it's pretty amazing to think of the series of events that led to the setup of something like this. And also Peter Atkinson sort of giving the actual finances, a go. And I'm sure that Richard also was probably deep in his coffers, coming up with money in order to make this happen. Because it's not, as in my recent experiences with printing my own tokens, it is not cheap at all. All right, up next. Do you have any role-playing experience in particular, or is it mostly with board games? Richard's response. Well, I haven't designed role-playing games since I was 20. Back then, I concentrated on homemade systems for chivalry and sorcery, and then before that, Dungeons and Dragons. I played a lot of different role-playing games in my life. Many people who run role-playing game design role-playing material as well. I haven't role-played for a long time, other than small episodic games, no full-scale campaigns. I have a lot of respect for role-playing as a hobby, but almost everything I've designed recently has been a board game. It seemed there was an abundance of role-playing material already available. The variety and range of quality was huge, but you could almost always find something that would suffice. After all, my objective in designing games has always been to supply the sort of games I wanted to see and which weren't available. So I think that's like totally true. So this is an experience that I know secondhand, not because I was there, but because I've listened to other people talk about it. And that is the experience of walking into a game store like in the late 80s, early 90s. The Dungeons and Dragons sort of like fervor had already sort of taken over. So this is mostly an 80s thing. But you could walk into a game store and there would be like comic book type like racks just full of different adventures. And you could spend all day combing through like hundreds and hundreds of unique adventures. And even if you don't find the perfect one, you might find one that just suits your table and what you need. And I think he's totally right. At this time, with the production of this, the board game scene was huge already. And I feel like it would have been so difficult to break in. So I understand his perspective of sort of switching a little bit and going more of a card game route, which I find very admirable. Have you ever had any of your games published prior to Magic? Richard's response, no. Although I've got maybe 50 games in my closet designed to the point where I've actually played them with friends. Robo Rally is the closest to being published. In fact, it was purchased for me for publication by FASA, who gave it back after sitting on it for 2 years. Robo Rally is what connected me with Wizards of the Coast in the first place. Now, I have no idea what, true like Robo Rally is. I'm not familiar with this, but I would be fascinated to see the other 50 games that he has in his closet. Like, I'm just imagining, stuff to the brim of like old like graph paper and like the old line paper, just billowing out of this closet. It seems like such an interesting thing. And I think it goes to show too that there was all of these, I don't want to call them failures, but lead ups in game design. It wasn't like he just made Magic and it was an overnight success. He did this like 50 times prior. And then finally after that, he had something that he felt was good enough for production. So pretty crazy. I understand that Robo Rally played a large part in Magic's beginnings. How exactly did Magic become connected with Wizards of the Coast? Here we go. Well, Mike Davis, my partner in Robo Rally, and I had just met with Peter Atkinson and Jay Hayes to discuss the game, and another ultimately failed attempt to see Robo Rally published. Well, not really failed. They were going to publish it last year, and now it's on schedule again for spring of 1994. I'd asked Peter if there were any other games he was interested in seeing made, and he suggested something which required very little equipment and very little time to play. Say something between 15 and 20 minutes. Oh, just you wait for Commander. Just you wait. So that's what set me to thinking. The whole concept came together very quickly because I had a lot of basic pieces already lying around. For example, I had a game for which the deck would change every time you played it. When a card got destroyed in the deck, you ripped it up, and if a card got added, you made a new one and put it in. It wasn't exactly the kind of game you could publish without seeming like you were out to get the public, but the basics were there. I combined that idea with a bunch of others I had lying around. Are there any games like that I've ever played? I don't think so. That is kind of a neat idea to have. And I think this just shows his like creative mind at work here. Like he wanted a game where you just like keep ripping game pieces up and then putting them back into your deck. Very cool. And it's interesting that the Robo Rally was his gateway in with Wizards. They ultimately were going to accept it after it had been returned to him and denied by an alternative company. So this series of events had to be, I produced this game, I sold it to be published by another company who sat on it and then ultimately decided not to publish it. And then 2 years later, because it was possibly a success and I liked it, I submit it to Wizards of the Coast and I sit down with Peter Atkinson. But during that time, we had a discussion and determined that Robo Rally wasn't actually, something that they were really super keen on. Or maybe they were. It seems like they were going to publish it. But instead, they wanted something additional, something different. So it's like this game that was pushed back for over 2 years, then eventually led to his foot in the door with WotC. I find that crazy. What happened after the initial idea? I understand this game took 2 years to playtest. What are the steps, generally, that go into developing a dinner conversation into a game like this? Well, it's impossible to generalize. I've never been involved. I don't think anybody has with a game like Magic or with a playtest process like Magic. All the other board games and card games which I designed were vastly easier to playtest. The hardest part was the initial 3 months of thought, coming up with a chassis for the game which could handle the requirements which were set upon it. For example, there was the requirement that everyone should be able to play with any selection of cards they liked from the available cards, and that required a lot of decks to play around with. Actually, when we got to the next step, when it was actually good enough to make cards and give them to my friends, it was a lot of fun. It was an exciting environment, something we had never seen before. Throughout the playtest period, the sophistication of the play environment kept growing. It acquired a lot of depth. I had hoped for that, but I hadn't counted on it. Curious. So I think that this is another thing. So like alpha, beta, pre-testing, all of that. So there's somebody that I play with in one of my groups. Admittedly, I don't get together with them enough anymore. I get together maybe once every other month just because of my schedule and how it works. But he was a part of like the very initial release and play testing of MTG at Rochester Institute of Technology. This was the time when Richard Garfield was touring around and actually like giving people either playtest cards or newly printed cards from like the very first set. And the goal was to sort of, get more people interested in the game, expand the game, of course, and bring it to more game stores, but also to continue to playtest. And that was something that my friend, his name is Kyle as well, remembers fondly from that time when he was in college. So it just goes to show that the development cycle for this game was probably nightmarish to some level. And it's very curious that, we got the game that we do have today. The fact that it made it at all is astounding. Was it in the playtest process that the seeming infinite number of Magic variants developed? The game hadn't been around very long, but there are numerous versions of the game that were not originally captured in the rules. That seems to be part of its addiction. Well, hey, there you go. The fact that there is so much variety within a given set of parameters. And then this is Richard's response. The variations have certainly caused more prevalence. The variations have certainly been more prevalent since it hit the market, because in playtesting, I was usually around to make sure that people were playing the same game. People were taught to play verbally. The idea was that eventually there would be rules printed up so that everyone would be playing the same game. But there was always some experimentation, because after all, every time you played a game, it was a new deck, and every time you played against somebody new, it was a new game. In many ways, varying the rules is simply an extension of the premise of the game. Wait a second. He's saying varying the rules? Oh, man. Interesting. Play with a seeming infinite number of variants developed. Oh, I think that they mean different ways to actually go about playing the game itself. So that's interesting. That might also be, the idea of why we have so many different formats like Standard, the limited formats, Commander, Oathbreaker or Oathkeeper, whatever it is. All of those. Also, I do want to focus in on this photo. See if I can get it nice and close for you guys. Focus in on it. So there's an interesting little piece of Magic lore. I think that's Richard right there. Young man. So initially, when they were doing the play testing, Lily Wu, who I don't believe he is with anymore, but at the time he was dating, he actually had this thing planned where he was playtesting MTG with Lily Wu, and he put a card in his deck called Proposal, and he shuffled it into his deck, and it was just, if he had the mana to cast it, he could actually cast the card, and then he would show it to Lily and hopefully, surprise her. Pretty sweet. And during the playtesting of the decks that they were doing, I think Lily dumpstered him 5 times in a row. And they were in the middle of their 5th game or 4th game. This is the way the story goes. When she asked him, do you just want to give up? Because, clearly you're not going to win. And, he persisted and then eventually drew the card and cast it. And, of course, Waterworks, very surprised, etc. But that card still exists with either Lily or Richard. And then they also produced, I think, 9 more or 10 more in total. And they gave them to family and friends. There's no intention of them ever to hit the market. However, I imagine a world where those cards eventually make it to market would be insane in value. I don't know about the same as the One Ring, but pretty crazy, I would imagine, just because of the story that's tied to them and the fact that it was a limited run done before the game really even came out. It seems like such a neat piece of Magic history. So I'd be curious to see what those would fetch at auction. That's for sure. All right, here we go. You've said that Magic isn't really about 2 people dueling. It's more about the participation of everyone who plays Magic in one gigantic collected game. What do you mean by that? I'm curious to see what his response is. So Richard says, there is a foundation game where 2 people sit down and play a game of Magic, to have this duel or that duel. But everybody who plays Magic for any length of time knows that this sort of fades in importance, or at least in the amount of time spent, before trading, bartering, discussing strategy, and so forth. This, for me, is a very important part of the game. The associations you and I make can greatly affect our interactions in our play group. If I can convince you that your force of nature is being wasted in your deck and should actually be in my deck and can trade you for something in return to make your deck work much better, then the next time we play with everybody else, the game has changed. You might say the duel is to Magic what combat is to a role-playing game. In a lot of ways, a big part of the game is storytelling, talking about the cards. Even in playtesting, there were rumors of cards that weren't out there, or which were out there but someone had put in their closet and couldn't find anymore. Stories should evolve about the world itself. Stories would evolve about the world itself. I consider that a part of the game. That's very interesting. I feel like the spirit of that maybe is not totally lost, but I feel like in general, it's not quite the same as what we see nowadays with the way that the game is produced. And maybe I'm wrong. I would love to interview somebody on the production team at, Wizards and just kind of get the idea of what it takes to produce this game in the modern format. And of course, I would love to sort of compare that to this, because clearly the way that this is being portrayed in the interview is that there is a lot of love for this game, and it is about the community. And they're also doing a very good job, I would say, of marketing this to the widest variety of people possible based on Richard's answers here. Let's move on. How does the multiverse of Dominia, which you described briefly in your introduction to the rulebook, play a part in Magic the Gathering? After all, you can play the game without engaging in Dominia conceptually. Why is Dominia part of the collectible card game? I'm also curious. The concept of Dominia naturally extends from the concept of the game itself. In the game, players are given a piece of an unknown world. They will learn about the game universe by playing in it, talking about it, by trading, experimenting with cards. The natural evolution of the game involves the release of more cards so the game doesn't remain finite, but is always growing and changing. This extends to the concept of a multiverse, where there is an endless possibility, not one world, but many worlds. In Magic, the way cards mix and match is weird. Why, for example, would Arabian Nights cards be mixed in with Ice Age cards? This is, oh my God, they're talking about it right here. One way to understand this is through a multiverse of planes. The cards describe some small collection of planes, which expands and becomes more comprehensible as more cards are encountered. Man, that is perfectly put by Richard there. So well said. There are so many people that hate on the Universes Beyond stuff, and I think that this right here, this section really sort of sums up at least Richard's thought about Universes Beyond, because he's talking about Arabian Nights interacting with Ice Age, two totally separate things that don't seem to go together. How do we play them and mix and match them? and it's within the multiverse theme. And you can get in trouble with that. Don't get me wrong. Like, for instance, Marvel with their multiverse, there's maybe some holes and it's not always the most, concrete. But I think that is such a beautiful answer to that question. Do you think that with the release of other Deckmaster products, Dominia will become a larger part of the way people play the game? And then Richard's response: people will always be able to play Magic as a card game. For those who want a world to hang their fantasies on, I think Dominia will be developed a little bit more. There are certainly efforts in that direction. The more I think about it, the less the multiverse becomes a mere aside to the game. Very cool. So this would have been before the production of books. I also have like the original novels that were produced for MTG. Came out after this. I think that maybe he was already in works or discussion with somebody about it, which is very interesting. It sounds like maybe he was already thinking about the production of this, or maybe this is just like a not complete answer. He's sort of leading with this a little bit, but fascinating. How do you think the collectability of the cards affects the game, particularly on role-playing experience? Is card collecting an integral part of the play process in some way? Richard's response: there are several meanings to the term collectible. For a gamer, it means that many of the cards are hard to get. If there is a card I want, then unless I'm rich, I have to negotiate for it. Joke's on you, we just proxy. That adds a social aspect to the game. And yes, I think it is a very important part of the game. Very interesting. It irritates some players that a kid can walk in and get a booster pack and the kid will have a card in the deck that they don't have and can't simply buy. It's part of the game, and players have to deal with that. They can deal with that either by trading with the kid before the card is covered with chocolate stains, or by finding some friends who will trade with them, or by taking solace in all the cards they have that others don't. That's a part of the game, just as the constant development of characters is essential to role-playing. Would you enjoy role-playing a character with all the equipment and abilities in the game? Your limitations define your character as much as the character's abilities do. Wow. I'm going to let that one just sink in. So the person who made this game, the original thought process was essentially, you're going to be limited by choice. You're going to open packs, maybe trade with people. That's the concept of this game. That's my idea for this game. And you're going to be okay with the fact that, some kid with a chocolate covered hand has a good card that you simply don't. And he kind of drops the mic. If there's a card I want, then unless I'm rich, I have to negotiate for it. I mean, you can understand why this take isn't very popular, with today's crowd. I mean, I actually do, on some level, I vibe with this because when I was growing up as a young person, I played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh! And during that time, I had what I had, and I had to trade with other people, other, members of my class or friends. And that was a part of the game. And I learned a lot about deck building and my limitations and restrictions for playing the game because of those things. So I find it fascinating that that was a core principle of this game from the get-go. It's understanding the fact that, we want you to be limited by choice to some extent. That seems like a deliberate choice based on what Richard's saying here. And I would be curious, actually, very curious to see what Richard's response would be now. Does he think proxies are okay, for instance? How does he feel about the current market where you can go on TCG Player and get any card that you want for a reasonable-ish price? Some of them are crazy, of course, Dockside and the rings and all that. But I'd be curious to see what he feels about the current gaming environment. Does he feel like it's too in one direction? Does he feel like it's a bastardization of the initial game that he made? I'd be very curious to see what he says. All right, this is a really long response here. So I want you guys to brace yourselves for this one. The question comes, were you surprised at how addictive and how popular Magic has become? Are there elements that playtesting and marketing the game generated which were not a part of the original design? Oh boy, here we go. Richard's response: every time more people joined the playtest crowd, the environment got all the more interesting. It wasn't like another game, like a board game, say, like Robo Rally. The more people were in contact with Robo Rally, the more people were interested in it. That's it. People would bring all kinds of personality to the game, but really, it was a very one-dimensional thing compared to Magic. The more people got involved with Magic, the more the game developed. The world size grew, more cards were around, more varieties to play experience developed, and more perspectives on the game were available. It was natural, I think, to be hard for a player of Magic to realize the impact of going with handmade cardstock cards with black and white art Xeroxed from comic books to the cards which Jespers put together, which of course look stunning. And I think Jesper is one of their artists. I knew that they would be collectible because people were already collecting those little pieces of cardstock. Of course, they were going to collect the final product. In themselves, they are 10 times, 100 times much more collectible, orders of magnitude better. And they still have all the things which made them collectible before. In particular, their effects on the metagame, which I keep coming back to. Very interesting. Very different thought process to what Wizards announced for many years. They basically said they didn't pay attention to the secondary market and what was going on, with like gameplay and stats and stuff. And then eventually they redacted that because they realized how ridiculous that sounded. Richard goes on. I think there are a lot of aspects of the game which conspire to make it so addicting. Short playtime, generally, its colorfulness. Also, oftentimes two-person games are much too confrontational. Chess, I think chess is a great game, but a lot of people don't like playing it because if the other person is better than they are, they simply get crushed. At least that's their perspective. Their loss seems like a fault, as if they didn't if they didn't think hard enough or something. But in Magic, people can disassociate themselves from losing. There's the great equalizer, luck. But this game has something more. People's decks are losing, but the people themselves are not. I mean, people play with what is fun to play with, and they build their deck however they like. Somehow the responsibility for the game, personally, is lessened. Yet there's a lot of skill to deck assembly and play. It allows very competitive people to play with those who aren't so competitive without either person getting hurt or feeling they lost out on something. These types of games are my favorite because sometimes I like to kick back, relax, play a game, and not be threatened by it. Ooh, threatened by it. Other times I want to go for the throat and play as cleverly as I can. One other thing I think lends to its popularity is the fact that really, there aren't that many new game ideas out there. I know that I go to a game store 3 times a year. I've got my money in my back pocket and I'm ready to buy whatever games I want. Maybe I can't afford it, but I'm going to treat myself. A lot of times when I go to the game store, I walk away without anything. The reason is because when I go there, there's often nothing new. Just the same old stuff dressed up differently. This was illustrated repeatedly by the rejection of Robo Rally on the grounds of it not fitting into any of the game company's, quote, universes, unquote. It is a credit to Wizards of the Coast that they allowed Magic to be published as I presented it, rather than cramming it into a Primal Order or a Talislanta framework. I'm not sure what those are. It would have weakened the game. I think that there are people out there who like playing games, who like getting into something new, and Magic appeals to them. I did actually think that it was going to be very successful, as of course so many people who backed it from the start did also. But as successful as it has been, I don't know. I do remember calling Peter many times saying how nervous I was because the whole idea seemed extremely viral. People liked talking about the idea of the game enough that it seemed like it was spreading on its own. There was always the fear that it would fall wholeheartedly into somebody else's hands before we even got the chance, with our small company's resources, to put something together. Whew, give me a sec. So I think this whole section here, where Richard is talking about how you can kick back and play the game casually or play it competitively, actually still holds up completely to today's standards. I would say that there are still a lot of variances and feel bad moments within the MTG space, but a majority of that comes from probably not having a good enough Rule Zero discussion. And I mean, he says it right here. These types of games are my favorite. Sometimes he wants to kick back, relax, play a game, not be threatened by it. I find that interesting, the verbiage there. Other times I want to go for the throat. Ooh, that's a card. Maybe they made that card because of this text here, and play as cleverly as I can. I find it interesting just because obviously, I mean, this game was designed with the intention to be as like wide reaching as possible. And the fact that it actually worked. I mean, they talk about it like if you don't have an audience, it's going to be hard to, like a specific audience in mind, it's going to be hard to select and make something for them. And that's honestly things that we still deal with today, myself included. Like, what do people want to watch on YouTube, for instance, coming from me? Like, what perspective do I have to offer, you know? But very cool. Let's keep moving. Are you worried about what's happening now? All these Magic-inspired collectible trading card games bubbling up here and there? Richard's response, no. I'm excited by it. Now that my ideas have been realized and we've gotten released first, I'm interested in seeing what comes out. People following Magic will have an easier time of it than we had because they have something to model themselves on. That was really the hard thing about Magic. There were so many things for which there weren't any precedents. There wasn't anybody we could call up and say, what should we do here? This doesn't really work. Or how are we going to handle this problem? Because nobody had solved any of those problems before. We've solved a lot of these problems in Magic, but our competitors are still going to have a hard time, I believe. I think that designing a trading card game is much harder than designing a board game or a card game. I know, that's a fact. Nobody would argue that. There were problems in there that people setting out to design the game will not know exist until they run into them. And I'm sure many people will make it through and we'll get a lot of really good games. And I'd like to see that. I'd like to see this field evolve. Curious. Very pro competition from Richard here. Let's keep going. Do you have an idea where the Deckmaster products will go, how they'll be indebted to Magic, and what challenges they will face when they're different than those Magic encountered? Will it be inventing an entirely different game? Richard's response, I have no clue. I know that in my second game, I'm having a lot of difficulty getting all the pieces right. Magic doesn't seem to have provided so much help for me there. I really have no clue what form the others' trading card games will have. So they're actually talking about building entirely new card systems here, which is curious. I mean, it's in a Magic publication, but okay. Do you have a general direction do you want to see the Deckmaster products go in? Garfield's response, yes, I'd like to see it go to a simpler games. Magic was never a mass market game. I was hoping that it would be popular with game hobbyists, otherwise it would need to be simpler. I expect the Deckmaster line to develop simpler and simpler games, hopefully without sacrificing the kaleidoscope of colors that has generated so much enthusiasm. Very, very interesting. Magic was never a mass market game. Well, guess what? It kind of is. If you base it on the raw numbers alone. But I can understand where he's coming from. But it's curious that that's the answer. Like he wants it to be open to as many people as possible, but then says that it was never intended to be a mass market game. I don't know. It almost feels like a cop-out answer. I don't know. Do you have any feel for how Magic the Gathering, separate from other Deckmaster games, will evolve, how play will change? In your editorial for this issue of The Duelist, you mentioned the difference between the wild play environments and the structured play environment and suggest that the general movement is away from everybody getting very excited and trying to build these unbeatable decks towards using the tools that you have on hand and posing that as the challenge, working within a structure. The difference between duplicate and contract bridge, that sort of development. Do you think Magic is headed in that direction? Garfield's response, I think that with what we have right now, Magic, it's necessary that people take the deck building only so seriously. I think the wild, free-for-all, and the more structured environments will both exist. The less competitive and less resource players will always be able to compete and build whatever decks they want. The more competitive players may find that deck building more and more powerful decks in an unstructured and card-rich environment makes the game less fun. I don't know, talk to the CDH players. In the future, it's possible that our card mix will be such that even with well-resourced players, the very competitive ones will be able to build decks without boring themselves. Other people will take it upon themselves to restrict themselves and others in various ways, limiting the development of decks that are not much fun to play or play against. They may be fun to develop. That was certainly a conscious decision on my part. At the beginning we were thinking, oh, we shouldn't have these card combinations available because they're too powerful. Say hello to the Moxes, right? But after a while, I realized that everyone was having a blast finding these powerful combinations, quote, killer decks, as they're often called. And so I stopped being really careful about it. So yes, I think that both environments will exist. It's easy to find the wild environment because that's sort of how the game begins. But the structured environment is not easy to find. A lot of serious people play and think, oh, this is a great game to play, but after a while, with all the decks that are so powerful and boring to play, why should we even bother? The structured environment allows you to deal with that. Players have an enormous amount of control over the sorts of games that they're playing. This, to me, sort of poses a question about how people were acquiring cards back in the day. It seems that the assumption here from Richard Garfield is that the game is majorly going to be opening packs, and what you get is what you get. But then he's talking about how competitive players are going to be able to build their decks, quote unquote, like however they want, which I understand. I mean, for a competitive environment, for a constructed environment like that, you would have to sort of build it however you want, quote unquote. But I would love to sort of be teleported back to this time and just sort of take it in. Like, how are you actually getting these cards, right? Like, were there singles available like today? And I think the answer is yes, as we'll find later on in the magazine as we're, going to hopefully steam through here. There is actually a whole table of card lists in here with pricing available for like aftermarket pricing. So there was clearly a market in mind for this. And I just wonder how robust that market was. Are you disturbed by any of the directions Magic has gone? Certain destructive tendencies, things that bother you about the way the game is taken off? Or does it have its own life now, separate from the designer's intentions? Richard's response: it certainly had its own life, separate from the designer's intentions, ever since its early playtest days. Am I displeased with any of those things? No, not really. It's exciting for me to see the variety of people who've been brought together by the game. I have no real complaints yet. It hasn't been out very long, so I don't know its long-range effects. If the market becomes flooded with trading card games of various and sundry quality as the result of Magic, I will be disappointed. It's fair. Has developing Magic affected your life in any unexpected ways? Has it directed you along paths you never thought that you would follow? Yes, absolutely. Next year I'll be leaving teaching for a year, perhaps a couple of years, maybe forever, who knows, to enter the game industry. I never would have felt confident enough in the game industry to do that without Magic's success. Certainly, no matter how successful Robo Rally is, it would never have led to that. The game has had very major effects on my life in general. The friendships that have been forged designing this game and putting it together are very strong. They probably wouldn't have been developed without the game. Spending so much time on something over such a long period of time is bound to affect you. Fair answer. How about your students? Has it had any effect on the classroom at all? The game was fully developed by the time I became faculty at Whitman. My teaching has been full-time. Now there's a growing awareness of Magic among the students. I get questions about equal parts card questions and where can I get my decks questions. But its effects on my students has been very small. Yeah, how wild is that? Like, thinking back, you were the person being taught by Richard Garfield when this game was sort of inaugurated. Crazy to think about. Do you think you'll go back to teaching eventually after a few years in the gaming industry? It all depends. I enjoy teaching. There's a good chance I will return. Did he ever return? I don't know. I'll put it up on screen now. Did he ever return? Maybe he did. Maybe he didn't. Do you have a favorite game designer? Someone who in your mind has had a significant contribution to the gaming industry? Richard's response: well, I've already given my underlying praise of Cosmic Encounter, both the original from Eon and Mayfair's excellent reprint. Certainly Tom Jolly, Wiz War. Oh, Francis Tresham, the fellow who made 1830 and Civilization. Any two games that are so different show talent to me. Those are some games off the top of my head. I'll probably kick myself later on for forgetting my all-time favorite game or something. Oh, and an amazing book came out last year by Schmittenberger, New Rules for Classic Games. It's a must for a game enthusiast. Man, oh God. This is making me want to go through and like purchase all these things and just look at them. Like, what was the inspiration for this man? Like, clearly this was, in some ways responsible for the production of MTG, not, in and of themselves, probably component parts of them that have led to it. But it's so fascinating. I would love to go through this old stuff and see bits and pieces that maybe actually made it into MTG, or you could actually see sort of the connection to the greater game of Magic. We were also interested in your sources of inspiration. Outside of developing Magic and your work as a professor, what kinds of things do you do? What do you find inspirational? Not that you necessarily have a life outside of Magic and teaching. It seems like those things would take an awful lot of time. That's on God. Richard's response: recently, it hasn't felt like I've had much of a life outside of Magic. Well, certainly all forms of literature. Fiction is one thing I stick to. Even in the depths of my darkest time consumption nightmares, I read before I go to sleep, and then often in the morning. I try to alternate between sci-fi and fantasy books and other forms of fiction. Movies, I love movies. I'm a movie glutton. I haven't seen a new movie for a long while, but when I was at Penn, I averaged probably a movie a week, and I would see dreadful films and amazing films, and I enjoyed them all. I had the capability of criticizing each of them, and that didn't mean I didn't still enjoy them. both mainstream and alternative. I enjoy cross-country skiing and crayfish hunting. Interesting. Those are when I'm in the Northwest. Visiting family and friends is very inspiring. And certainly, I meant to mention this before, playing games. I haven't done much of that either recently. Certainly, I couldn't design games without enjoying playing them first. I know some designers that I think would disagree. They prefer just to design them. I could not do that. I like to have a game group that meets once or twice a week to play anything, from card games to board games to role-playing games. I think that speaks for itself. You have to be a crayfish hunter in order to make, any card game, really. Next question. What kind of card games do you play? Richard's response, any kind of card game. I think it's easier to name the card games that I don't play. I mean, I even play War. Although with War, you have to make it interesting. Last time I played War, we played that every time you won War, you got to add a new rule to the game. The rules began with something like if you played an 8, you would automatically win, and evolved into if you played the Queen of Spades, you had to run around the room shrieking. And then there was a sort of global rule that said if you forgot a rule, then you lost a card. So any kind of game. I play bridge, I play hearts, several games from the Far East I won't mention because they probably won't be recognized. Poker. Poker is an amazing game, often under-recognized for its strategic game value. And in all these games, I play the original forms and respect them, except for War, where I don't respect the original. But I also played mutant forms. A lot of character here. I've played so many bizarre forms of hearts that I've considered writing an entire book of hearts. I'm probably regarded by some as a faculty member at Penn as having set mathematical progress by some number of years. Part of that was the fact that I would constantly distract people, and one of the things I would distract them with was the hearts ladder. The game was sort of a blend of English-American hearts and Chinese hearts, which I called Turbo Hearts. We had this Turbo Hearts ladder for several years, and it was a lot of fun. Many people were weaned on this and considered regular hearts boring and vanilla. So hilarious to me. Even in as well-established existing games, he's still sort of developing his own little rules and things. Also, poker, bro. I love poker. I love playing it. I love watching it. The game is so dynamic and interesting. Highly recommend it. Not to waste money or get addicted to gambling, but maybe just give it a watch if you're not somebody who is really giving it a try. Last question, I think. I wouldn't want to leave this out this last very important question, which has to do with your socks, Richard. I understand that you don't often wear the same kind of socks on both feet. Our project coordinator, Vic Wirtz, was interested in detailed explanation of this phenomena and what it perhaps expresses about you. Here we go. Well, I would expect Vic to get right to the heart of things. I'm glad he asked such an insightful question. When I was at Bell Labs, I worked at Bell Labs for a couple of years, I stopped matching my socks for a while because it was just too time consuming. After a little while, when I got back to graduate school, I thought, okay, let's match all my socks. So I tried to match all my socks and I came up with 17 socks with no mates. I had no clue where the others had gone. Whether perhaps I had just worn one without the other for enough times that they looked different, or whether they legitimately didn't have a mate. It seemed like a waste to throw them all away, so I said, forget it. It saves time anyway. So now I have a sock box, a very large sock box in my closet filled with socks. I didn't understand that's what a sock box was. Thank you, Richard. And I reach in and grab two. I'm beginning to take more care these days. Sometimes I go for particular types of contrast, like matching my left sock with my pants and my right with my shirt. Also, I get such a hard time when I actually do draw a matching pair that oftentimes I'll throw one back in, which I used to not do. My friends have encouraged me this. I was recently visited by a friend from the East Coast who brought me 8 different socks, one from each of their friends. My family has fought it, of course, with the traditional tactic of giving me all the socks of the same color. So I have a large number of these gray socks, one of which is on my left foot right now. But my family is hopelessly outnumbered because my sock box is way too big for them to make a significant impact. They've simply given up. Oh my God. This is in the original Magic publication. Richard Garfield is talking about his socks. Oh God, let that set in. All right. Last question. Well, is there potential for another collectible trading card game, collectible trading socks? Maybe this was the inspiration for the cards, but I've never traded anybody my socks. Yeah, it's just socks all the way down. Turtles all the way down, socks all the way down. Same thing. All right, we are only on page 16 of this, and we kind of gotta get through this thing. So I'm gonna highlight a few things. I looked ahead. However, I find this particularly hilarious. So this was a page that I wanted to look at, 5-player Magic. It's giving you some general ideas about setting up a 5-person Magic game, one where each player has a different color. So it would be, 5 different at that point. Maybe 6 if you wanted to include colorless nowadays. But this was 5-player Magic. And it starts off with this weird little short story. I don't really know. I'm going to read it and you guys decide what it is. I looked to my left at Blue, and he shook his head in powerless sympathy. He could not help me against Red. Red's divisive tactics had caused tension early on. First, he brought out the Ankh of Mishra, then laid a web of mana barbs across the lands. Enemy and ally alike would fall to his erosive design unless he were taken out of the picture, and quickly. My power was not great, but he had used his strength early, and while green and black would not help me, they could not find reason to hinder me either. It was not long before the red mage had fallen, and the real battle began. I needed to stop Blue, who was working furiously against green, my only partner against black. But did I dare risk angering my blue ally? I pretended to unknowingly permit green to take the upper hand in his battle against blue. I could easily have finished off Blue then, but I wanted to use his powers to my advantage. I offered to protect him if he would expend some of his power against black, his ally against green. He agreed, but he had a way out that I hadn't foreseen. I used my remaining strength to hold off the blow of green. Blue could now strike against black, and he protected from green as he had agreed. I was shocked to see his creatures move on the offensive against me. Stunned and drained of power, I could do nothing but watch, helplessly as I was destroyed. Not surprisingly, black solidified his spoken alliance with blue the next round with defense and a stunning blow to green. I would have commiserated with green's position, but a dead face holds no pity. I have no doubt that he was not left to suffer long. What is this? What? Oh my God, what am I reading? They thought that was a good idea to print in 1993, apparently. God. Anyways, so this is just musings on how to sort of go about playing a 5-person game. It gives you thoughts on offense and defense. Should you be sharing resources, eliminating players? And to be fair, this is very unlike the Commander that we're used to. It's sort of like make up your own rules and go from there. I don't even see like a listing for life totals. So this was very much like just an inspiration for other people. It's like, yeah, do your own thing, make your stuff. I'll put up some photos of that. But unfortunately, it wasn't as enlightening as I thought it was going to be. This next section is interesting. It's circles of protection, how to use them and how to beat them. And you see they did this nice little divide right here with the how to use them, how to beat them. And this whole thing is about the circles of protection because early on, these were strong cards. And it seems like, as you read through some of this, it talks about how to use the different types of them, how to, go against them, what types of, interaction to play in order to remove them. Very interesting. But not very pertinent to this discussion. And if you want to go through that and read that on your own time, you're more than welcome to. But for me, my mind is getting shattered. And I want to do this interview with Anson. Because this person right here is the artist behind some of the artwork that we've seen and also some very famous art pieces. So let's get into that. An interview with Anson. As a child of Sitka, Alaska, Anson Maddox's haunts were woods, ocean shores, and Russian graveyards. In 1988, Anson moved to Seattle, where he attended the design program at Cornish College of the Arts. Wait a second. He later left Cornish to publish illustration full-time. One of my friends went to Cornish. Anson's many art credits include numerous gallery shows and installations in the Seattle area, as well as illustrations for several Seattle-based magazines. His fantasy work has appeared in products from Garfield Games, Mayfair Games, Pagan Publishing, and Wizards of the Coast. All right, pardon me. The text is really small on some of these. It's not that I'm blind, but it's very tiny, so give me a little bit of time to read this. How did you get involved with Magic in the first place? I got hooked up with Wizards of the Coast about 2 years ago. I knew that their art director, Jesper Meifers from school, Cornish College of the Arts. He asked to see some of my work at one point, and he had seen a book that I had done a while ago called Dark Dreamer, which I was really not that happy with, but which he thought was interesting. So I showed him that, and some of the recent work that I've been doing, which is more surreal than fantasy or sci-fi. He gave me some tasks from the Talislanta Bestiary. Oh boy, I can't even read these words. It's Thystrams Collectania to begin with. He just had me do a couple of pieces to see how I would do. He liked them, so he dumped a whole load of them on me. And as the deadline for the book drew closer, I kept piling more and more. He kept piling more and more on me. Actually, Magic was the same way. I ended up taking a lot of work that other people couldn't get done in time. I did 4 in one day at one point just to meet the deadline. And it says here that he did 31 cards for the initial release. 30 of them were used. How is Magic art assigned? Has Jesper always given artists the card name and let them come up with anything they want with the design? Yeah, that's how it was originally, and it was really exciting to him. I think he likes to let the artist interpret the title of the cards the way that they see them. That way he's completely surprised when he sees their work, and it probably produces more variety throughout the deck. With Magic the Gathering, the designers had a general idea of what the text was going to be, but when they saw the artwork, they tried to tailor the text to the art. But I can't decide whether it's good or bad to know more about the card or not. Now that I know about Magic, I might try to suit the work to the game, and I don't know if that's such a good idea. I try to get as diverse as possible in the cards that I do. How is collectible card game art different from book illustration or paintings? What makes it different other than smaller size? That's actually a major factor right there. Since books and paintings are larger, you have to put a bit more of care into them. Don't tell Jesper that. What I mean is that the Magic card is going to be reduced so much from the original. You kind of have the sense of what's going to be lost in the reduction. So you know where you can take liberties, where you can leave spaces a little rougher than you would do on something that you know is going to be seen at the actual size. That's why I'm a little hesitant to sell the originals for Magic. Some of them I just don't like the looks of the actual size. I never thought about buying original artwork from the artists, but that is fascinating. Is fantasy your genre generally? What other types of things do you work on? I prefer surrealism. I don't have a strong interest in fantasy. I like to do it, but I don't like traditional fantasy, elves and dwarves and things like that. It's not really my cup of tea in general, but if I do them, I like to do them in a new way. I like my own sort of homemade fantasy. That's a good challenge, to fake something traditional like that and reformat it so that it still has its core, but it has my own feel to it. All right, I'm going to skip ahead. I like this one here. Do you use models at all? Human models, that is? Sometimes. Human, inhuman. Sometimes I use a model to do a piece for which I've specifically had an atmospheric or photogenic idea in mind. Or if I have a person that I think would be particularly appealing in a piece, and I'd like to capture their essence, so to speak. Do you ever use yourself as a model? I think it's something that just happens in my work. My features pop up in my characters, my anatomy, my proportions. I'll be drawing something and I'll realize it looks an awful lot like me. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. Sometimes I'll let it go, and sometimes it's completely inappropriate for what I'm working on. Inhuman models. What do you think he means by inhuman models? I mean, there's a pair. There you go. That's some Anson artwork right there in the middle of the magazine. 1993, Anson Maddox. Wow. I love that Anson is also like a coffee shop aficionado, because it says here, you said that you work here or you work in coffee shops. And then he goes on to say that he and his friends will go to coffee shops and just make artwork at the coffee shops. That's kind of interesting. And it seems like he does a variety of different odd jobs. I feel like that's sort of still a thing for a majority of artists, is you have to just do all these different little odd jobs for people in order to make ends meet. And it sounds like it was still the same in the 90s, unfortunately. All right, I have to read through this little collection over here on this side of the page. So draw your attention over here, class. What's the strangest thing you've ever done? Well, no, let me rephrase that. The strangest assignment that you've ever had. And then he says, maybe the Unspeakable Oath cover for Pagan Publishing. Why is it strange other than it's strange? Well, I guess that's the most blatantly strange piece that I've ever done just because it looks like flesh sewn together and bound to a book cover. I don't know, that ranks at the top. It reminds me of some of the Magic cards you've done. Well, they requested that I do this based on what they saw in one of the Magic cards. Really? Living Wall or Lure? Living Wall, which was censored. You knew that, didn't you? No, what happened to it? There was an esophagus which they thought looked too much like to be a sphincter in another part of the body. That was the only one that got censored. Jesper was responsible for censorship? I take the fifth on that. Crazy. Ooh, look at this original artwork right here. So cool. Let me raise it on up. Oh God. I'm hitting my mic stand. Very cool. All right, let's keep moving. All right. You and I are going to read Lost in the Shuffle, The Musings of Richard Garfield. It is just a wall of text, but it seems rather interesting to me, so I'm going to read it so it's on the internet record forever. Growing up in Eugene, Oregon, my friends and I used to play the game called The Hunt. The hunters attempted to damage the pursued player by taking his flags or shooting him with a dart gun. A dart gun. The unique thing about this game was the disparity between the sides. Anywhere from 3 to 10 people would join forces to hunt a single player. I loved being the hunted. I knew I wasn't going to win, so I tried to put up the best fight I could. I also enjoyed the hunter's role, laying traps and trying to outthink the opponent. Aside from the dubious implications this childhood pursuit has for my psychological makeup, it shows that I never have been particularly interested in quote-unquote fair games. While I don't mind being in a position of gross power in games, I also enjoy fighting from an incredible disadvantage. In these cases, it isn't winning or losing that matters, but the play itself. And when a win doesn't go in an unexpected way, it's something to be remembered. I am not suggesting that fairness doesn't have its place. It's simply overrated. Fairness is overrated. You heard it here first. Dockside extortionist incoming. Magic lends itself to a huge variety of competitions, and the players have a lot of control about how fair the environment is in which they play. Arenas of Magic play have been roughly divided into 2 categories, the wild environment and the structured environment. In the wild environment, players can draw on any source of cards. Players can trade and duel with whomever they choose, with whatever decks they choose. This glorious anarchy attracts many people. You can play with deck concepts and ideas for a while, and then trade the deck away, and they grow tiresome. You can hunt down the weak decks for easy victories, or try and defeat a local Goliath. I love that. Oh my God. Tim, you're our local Goliath. The wild environment is usually favored by those who delight in deck building. New Magic players in particular love to fiddle with their decks, learning the fine art, or cold science, of deck construction. After all, one joy of the game is getting the first deck to work well. Totally agree. 100% agree. After playing in this sort of environment for a while, however, you may find that you'll want to reduce the emphasis on designing decks merely to win. Otherwise, the play will grow stagnant as players invent powerful decks that are boring to play. This does not mean that you have to refrain from being competitive. Rather, the object of competition changes, shifting away from the construction of a monster deck towards winning with the tools you allow yourself. Most playgroups I know have lots of decks floating around. The retired super decks, the weird decks, the medium-powered ones. These decks all have some sort of vague ranking, and players tinker with them and compete against each other to get the duels that they most enjoy. Some players are not trying to get a particular deck to win often, but rather to keep it from losing quite so often. Sure, the heavyweights can trounce the featherweights, but that doesn't mean that featherweights have no place. A featherweight is fun to play and tinker with, and it may take out a lightweight or even a medium weight from time to time. The modern power disparity. If you still want to maintain the challenge of building a powerful deck, there are some rules you can impose on yourself and other willing playgroup members without greatly restricting your play environment. One option is to maintain a single random deck that you keep separate from your card pool. You can use this deck to duel or trade with other people, but you cannot simply add cards to it. Such a low power deck may eventually grow in strength. and it's interesting to watch its progress or decline. I maintained such a deck for about 6 weeks, and through trade and play, the deck eventually had 120 cards to draw on, including several more rare cards that it started with. Man, that's so interesting. So I've heard other people talk about this where they have a specific deck that they just don't touch. The idea is they're just going to leave it forever, or as close to forever as you can get, and then come back to it many years later as like a sort of time capsule to see what we were playing, what was strong back in the day, etc., and to see where it is now. You know, I imagine certain situations where the cards like the One Ring or maybe Dockside end up getting banned for various reasons or for one reason. And then maybe in the future you look back and you go, man, I can't believe that we used to play those busted cards. Or maybe even worse is, man, those cards were so underpowered. Like, look at what we have now. Crazy to think about, leaving sort of a time capsule for yourself. You might also consider raising the minimum number of cards required for a duel, since it's much harder to make a predictable 60-card deck than a predictable 40-card deck. It's also a challenge to construct a good deck while limiting yourself to 2 or 3 cards of any particular type, excluding land, of course. If you enjoy this challenge, you might go further. Try building a winning deck with no duplicate cards. I see Singleton coming. Once you've developed your deck tuning strategy, however, you may find that the wild environment loses its charm. Power playing considerably narrows the field of viable opponents. True. Not a lot of CDH in my area. Also, there may be such an unequal distribution of cards in your playgroup that dueling against certain decks becomes frustratingly predictable. This is where the structured environment can add depth to the game. Structured environments vary, but they were all designed to keep the game fairer by controlling the player's access to cards. The simplest way to develop a structured environment within the playgroup is to give each player a random starting deck. This deck could be a factory deck, or one assembled using cards provided by one or more of the players. In this case, decks are built by trading between members of the playgroup rather than by purchasing cards. A more complex method, but one one which better satisfies the player who enjoys the competition of deck construction, is the draft. All the cards are laid on the table and players take turns picking cards for their decks. In a simpler form of the draft, the card set is shuffled and one card is turned up for each player. Each player selects a card, first pick, then rotates to another player. The more cards are turned up, then more cards are turned up. To speed up the draft, the cards can be grouped into 2s or 3s. While some players prefer to keep land out of the draft, others like to make land a limited resource, something that rarely happens in the wild environment. I'm glad that Richard Garfield also refers to the wild environment like I do. I call it out in the wilds. Totally agree. I say the same thing. Another game element that may be restricted is the trade. Trading can be a terribly influential factor on the game and can dominate the competition if it isn't controlled. While some players prefer the free-for-all, others may choose to restrict trading to some time period before or between games, or simply forbid it altogether. You may also decide that all trades must be made public within the playgroup. Imagine we all had to announce our purchases. Everyone would judge me greatly. Dueling may be structured in a variety of ways. The competition may remain a random set of duels between individuals or teams, or it may build toward a single winner. You may elect to hold a round robin where each player competes with every other player in a certain number of times. While some players prefer not to risk their important cards in an ante, requiring an ante is a good way to even the stakes in games between a strong and a weak deck. It can be fun to compete 2 decks until ante losses make one of them unplayable. Hilarious. Just steal all your cards from your friends. A structured environment does not make a wild environment impossible. The playgroup merely has to keep the cards for each type of play separate. To preserve the integrity of structured play decks, you may choose to mark the cards or to store the decks in the care of a single player. Serious playgroups have even been known to record the contents of all the decks. Okay, it makes more sense. So ante in the sense that the cards are going to go back in the bin that you get them from. You don't get to keep them. Okay. Future versions of Magic may cater more to keeping the wild environment under control by keeping the cards more uniform in strength, regardless of the card mix. However, players can improve their game by creating the play environment that best suits their interests. Very cool. All right, let's get into the final little section here. So we have a few things at the end, but a lot of it is just sort of, quick to get through. I'm not going to go too in detail about it. It's interesting they have a whole section here about some of the most misplayed cards. And then this whole section is about just clearing up what they do and how they do them. I'm going to list off the cards here. I don't know if I need to go through the entire ruling of them. Maybe I'll go through like one or two of them. For instance, Twiddle and Icy Manipulator. So funny. The most common problem cards are Twiddle and its cousin, Icy Manipulator. Icy Manipulator allows its controller to tap any land, creature, or artifact in play, while Twiddle allows the caster to either tap or untap a card. The confusion surrounding these cards stems from differing ideas of what tapping is. When a land card says tap to produce mana, players assume that turning the card sideways is what releases the mana. Unfortunately, that's not quite accurate. Tapped and untapped refer to the position of the card, not the generation of the effect. A player frees mana into the mana pool and then turns the land card sideways to remind everybody that the card has had its mana drained this turn. Creatures work in the same way. The controller employs the creature in an attack or defense and taps the card to indicate that it's been used. A change in position indicates a change in the status of the card. The resources of an untapped card are potentially available to the controller this turn, while the resources of a tapped card, however, are not. Cards like Twiddle allow you to change the availability of a card resource without actually generating the card effect. Very interesting. I'm not going to finish reading it here, but I'm just imagining like the debates at like the 1990s table about like, oh, well, you tap my thing with Icy Manipulator, so I get to generate the mana. When in reality, you could have just tapped it yourself. Like, I just don't understand like where this would come up, but I guess it leads to understanding the stack and the fact that this game was still brand new and probably very confusing for a lot of people. And also gives you a lot of like street cred if you came from this era, because you learned from the original. You had to like get this magazine to understand that, you know, tapping with Icy Manipulator does not actually generate the effect of the tapped card, which is kind of interesting. And then they also have a few others here. They have Jade Statue. They have Illusionary Mask. They have Chaos Orb. And then they have Kudzu and Lich. Just Lich. So that's some of the cards that they wanted to sort of, clear up, so to speak. Those are the most confusing cards, though there are many others that have caused players problems. Magic is such a dynamic game that the interactions between the cards can be extremely intricate. After all, one of the most enjoyable aspects of the game is figuring out how cards can work together. Usually the rules can guide you through the difficulties if you pay careful attention to the precise effect of the cards and the order in which they occur, the stack. You can usually sort out any conflicts or seeming paradoxes that may arise, but if you do get stuck, we're here. You can always email your requests to questions. You can always email your questions to questions@wizards.com. I don't think the @ loaded in. Or call Wizards of the Coast. What are you talking about? We're calling Wizards of the Coast. If my Icy Manipulator taps this, can we call in the middle of a game? That would be hilarious. I would love to get Dave Howell or Richard Garfield on the phone and just say like, hey, like I tapped this with my Icy Manipulator. Like, isn't it supposed to produce me mana? Such a weird time, bro. Very cool. So this is just some new games that are coming out at the time. So Vampire the Masquerade. Cool thing about Vampire the Masquerade, I'll see if I can find the photos of the different covers. But when they initially made Vampire the Masquerade, they had no idea that it was going to be adopted by sort of like this goth type of culture. And so on subsequent releases of the same first edition book, they changed the cover because they wanted to reach that audience in a faster way. So if you look at some of the originals, it doesn't look anything like the sort of gothic style. They were much more serious, I guess you could say. And then Netrunner and then Middle Earth, which is interesting. A Middle Earth Deckmaster game. Huh. We'll develop a collectible trading card game set in Middle Earth, a fantasy where J.R.R. Tolkien's classic novels, The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings trilogy. That's so interesting. Developed by Magic the Gathering developer Scoff Elias. Huh. I wonder how this went. Is this still like a thing that people play? I know that there's some board games and miniature games. Meslock's Challenge, a graphic story by Mark Poole. Isn't Mark Poole is actually one of the main artists, I believe. So that's not this, but this is something. I'll put this up on screen for you guys, this one. It's pretty neat. There's just a comic in here. What is this about, though? Oh my lord. That's so funny. This is a comic about Magic the Gathering. No way. It was created almost by accident. That is that Richard Garfield right there? By accident by a mathematician named Richard Garfield. Oh my lord, that's so funny. What? Start with 20 lives. It's just a bunch of children. To play the game, you start with 20 lives. It's just children in here. So funny. So that's the game. Do you like it? I love it. It's just a giant mammoth sitting on him. Crazy. These are more upcoming releases for that time of the year. Magic the Gathering Antiquities. No way. $1.45. No way. Ooh. Revised edition. $7.95 and boosters are only $2.45. Man. A booster pack of revised was $2.45 upon release. That is insane to think about. Oh my God. In mid-March, these gray bordered cards will take the place of the white bordered unlimited edition Magic. Gray border? What? Offering corrected cards and clarified rules, the revised edition releases will feature a constantly changing card mix. The first version contains 30 cards from the first two Magic expansions, including these from Arabian Nights. Crazy, crazy. Huh. You can get the Pocket Player's Guide for $7.95, and then Legends comes out only $2.45 a pack. That is so insane to me. $2.45. What is this? I've been reading this for the past like 2 minutes. I have no idea what this is. This is warping my mind. Look at the swirl. Oh my God, you can see it so well on the camera. This is trippy on so many levels for me. I have no idea what this is meant to really be. But you can send Ask Toad P.O. Box 707 in Benton, Washington. What is this? Crazy. Oh, interesting. Oh, cool. So this is like oh my God. This is actually insane. This is a recap of a tournament from the winner, the winner is Alex Parrish. So the duel depicted in this story has a bit of history behind it. This was the last game in a 2 out of 3 duel during the final round of the tournament held at Gen Con 93. The first officially sanctioned Magic the Gathering tournament. The participants were Rick Townsend, playing the part of Anton in The Tale Below, and Alex Parrish, better known here as Karshawn, and their winner was, well, read on to see. I know it was Alex Parrish, actually. I've heard about this before. And that's so crazy. So they just actually did a play-by-play, and then in the margins, they actually put in exactly what was happening. So the margin is Alex puts a mountain into play. Alex taps the mountain, summons Mons Goblin Raiders. Rick puts a plains into play. Alex then puts a swamp. Oh, he's playing Rakdos. He knows what he's doing. Alex taps a mountain and a swamp and casts Orcish. I almost said Bowmasters, but it's Oriflame. And then Alex attacks with the goblins. Alex is at 20. Rick is at 18. Rick puts a forest into play. Rick taps a plains and a forest and casts Circle of Protection Red. Alex taps a swamp, casts Unholy Strength on the goblins. Alex attacks with goblins. Now it's 20 to 14. Rick then puts a forest into play. Rick taps a plains and a forest and does Disenchant on the Unholy Strength. Alex puts a mountain into play. Alex taps both mountains and a swamp and casts Stone Rain on his untapped forest. That's just mean. Oh, man. Attacks with the goblins. Now it's 20 to 12. Plains, swamp. Alex taps both mountains and a swamp and summons Juggernaut. Oh, baby. Alex attacks with goblins. Rick taps plains into Circle of Protection Red and then takes no damage. Rick puts a forest into play. Taps both forests and both plains to summon Giant Spider. What a beamer of a card, Giant Spider. Alex taps for mana. This is turn 11, I think. Taps a swamp and casts Dark Ritual. Oh, baby. Alex taps a mountain to cast Disintegrate on the giant spider and taps a swamp, plus uses mana from the Dark Ritual for 4 points of damage to the spider, killing it. Alex attacks with the Juggernaut, and now the score is 20 life to Rick's 4. Poor Rick. Rick taps a forest and summons the Scribe Sprites, and then Alex taps a swamp and mountain to cast Terror, not of the peaks, but of Scribe Sprites. Say that 10 times fast. Whoa, wait, there's a card that's just Scribe Sprites and then Terror. Oh, the card is Terror, I understand. And then Alex attacks with the Goblins and Juggernaut to kill him. Crazy. And then from all of us at Wizards of the Coast and the Duelist Convocation, congrats to Alex Parrish, the 1993 Gen Con Magic the Gathering tournament champion, and to all the players in that first historic tournament. What a historic tournament. That is like, I got like chills reading that. That's so crazy. So incredible. So it was like Rakdos versus Selesnya, and it was Giant Spider and Juggernaut just battling it out. That's so awesome. And then back here, so there's the Duelist Convocation news, tournament coordinators needed, the Duelist forums, talking about forums, and then upcoming conventions. So they're going to be at all these conventions. And of course, they're going to be at conventions. At the Gen Con that they're discussing, they sold 2.5 million cards. So yeah, they're going to be there. And then this is amazing. No way. Oh, it's still in here. Wow. So you could rip this out, fill it out to be a part of the Duelist Convocation. I wonder if that's still a thing. It's probably not. But I wonder if I submit this. Can somebody ask somebody at WotC, like the president, if I submit this, can I become an honorary member of the Duelist Convocation? You could submit this to them. I'm happy to submit this, rip it out and submit it. If that'll get me access, you know? And then the Duelist. So managing by Lisa, art direction by Jesper, who was roasted in some of these. So funny. And then illustrations, production notes. This magazine would not have been possible without the contributions of countless people. Our thanks to Richard Garfield and Anson Maddox for being so generous with their talent and time. Sandra Everingham, Chris Rush, shout out. Oh my God, so many names of people. Crazy. Yeah, I mean, a lot had to go into this in order to make this happen. I love the feel of this. If you guys could feel this, the old style. And then over here is just when Wizards opened its doors in July of 1993, we had no idea what the summer had in store since our move to Seattle in 87. We had dreamed of starting a gallery catering to fantasy art collectors, role players, and avid science fiction fans like ourselves. We wanted to encourage what we feel is a fascinating and often overlooked genre. We never expected that only a few months after we got going, we would be approached by WotC, the creators of the most popular fantasy game of the year, and asked to display Magic the Gathering art. So crazy. Since then, we've been overwhelmed with calls and email from gamers and collectors looking for the originals of their favorite card art. The gallery currently displays over 140 pieces by various artists. The gallery is located at 117 Main Street in Kirkland, Washington. If you're interested in viewing or finding out more about Magic the Gathering or other fine fantasy and science fiction pieces we carry, we invite you to stop by. I am going to see if I can find photos of this because that is unbelievable to me that they had like a venue to go just to view art. But there it is at the back of the book, a little production there. Get this in the center. Coming next issue, a look at 3 Deckmaster releases, Antiquities, Legends, The Dark, a moody addition to your Gathering deck, plus a look at Magic the Gathering, the revised edition, a history of the 5 colors of Magic, stories from the playtesting days, and musings of Richard Garfield, and more. Guys, this was awesome. This was really, really quite something to go through all this. My voice is shot at the end of this. I feel like I can barely speak. But thank you, everybody who stuck around for this entire thing. I hope it was as interesting for you as it was for me. I would love to do another one of these, but that requires your support. So if this was something you liked, then like the video and certainly subscribe for more. But otherwise, I'm done. I need to go rest my voice and have some honey and tea in order to soothe this down and reduce the inflammation that's going on right now. But support my addiction so I can support your addiction. I've been Kyle, and I'll see you guys in the very next video. Talk to you later. Bye.